Welcome to Keep the Faith Ministry. My guest today is Dr. Norman McNulty from Lawrenceburg, Tennessee. He is a neurologist and he also loves to preach the Word. Welcome, Dr. McNulty, for joining me today in the studio. Tell me a little bit about your ministry and how the Lord has led you in your practice as well as your ministry.
Yes, well, thank you for having me here today. And I've been preaching and doing medicine for years now, and it really kind of started when I was in Loma Linda in medical school, where I was studying really hard to become a doctor, and you had to put a lot of time in to get through school. But I also have always had a burden for the Adventist message, the three angels' messages, and it was during that time of my life that I realized that if I could invest time into studying medicine, I could also invest time into studying the Bible. And so I've just found as time has gone on that the Lord has blessed those efforts, because if you put the time into studying the message for what God has given us for this time of Earth's history, the Lord wants that message to get out to people.
What is your area of emphasis?
Well, I enjoy prophecy. Daniel and Revelation I've always enjoyed studying, and I actually especially enjoy Daniel 11. But I enjoy the Laodicean message is fascinating to me. The prophetic role of the Second Advent movement, I always enjoy digging deeper into that. Righteousness by faith, as it's connected to the Advent movement and the cleansing of the sanctuary, is very important, and I enjoy sharing on that. Okay. So those are some of the things. I mean, the book of Romans and Hebrews I also very much enjoy studying.
How do you tie your practice with your ministry side? How does that work?
Well, Ellen White says that the medical missionary work is the right arm of the third angel's message. So when you meet people in your medical practice, you're meeting people that are broken physically and mentally and spiritually. They are. They may come for a physical problem, but there's usually other problems connected to that. And then you see that in church also, and not just in church, but wherever you go, that people have needs, whether they're physical, mental, or spiritual. And so really, a physician allows you to diagnose people in a certain way where you can tell that here's someone who has a need in a certain way. And when you do ministry, it works the same way. So it's a nice blended work. Ellen White describes it as a blended ministry.
So your doctor work opens up the way to talk about the spiritual healing that they really need.
That's right.
That's very important to see. And I think doctors need to understand how to use their practice in a way to reach souls. That's the bottom line.
Absolutely. In fact, I have sermons out on the internet, and I'll have patients who come to see me and they look my name up on the internet to find out information about where I practice and where is my office and my number and address. And then they find that I have sermons on the internet. And so that opens the door to talk to them about spiritual things also. So that's been nice.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Where do you see your ministry going in the next 10 years or so?
Yeah, I do a lot of preaching at various places. I expect over the next few years that I'll continue to preach in places where there's an interest for the last day message of Adventism and of preparation for the coming of Christ.
Is that getting more scarce, or is that...
No, I think it's getting more... I find that it's increasing. I think that more and more places, groups, churches, wherever you want to look, so to speak, everybody has an understanding that this world isn't the same. That the things that are happening in the world right now just aren't business as usual. And so there's a hunger and there's a thirst among people to hear that. And
do you think the recent, I should say, political campaign in America over the election, do you think that affects the way people think?
Yeah, I just gave a sermon about the election last week at my home church, and I quoted an article from the Washington Post, which just came out in the last week or so, where they were quoting a study that was done just a couple of months ago where they said that the current election is a leading stressor for Americans, along with people's work or their home life or whatever else. And I think among Adventists, it's especially concerning because when we see, we as Seventh-day Adventists know where America is headed prophetically. We know that. It's not a guessing game as to what America is going to turn out like in the end. We know where it's going. And so when you look at what happened with the Supreme Court ruling just over a year ago, and then you look at the candidates that we have running for office, America is really heading on a trajectory that will escalate where we understand it's going to end up. So that, I think a lot of people are starting to sense that.
Do you think the candidates are going to play into that once whichever one of them becomes president?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I don't have any, and I do follow this pretty closely, but I don't have any hard evidence that says Hillary Clinton said she was going to do this or Donald Trump said he was going to do that. But what I will say is that I believe either candidate has proven that they will do whatever is necessary politically, whatever is politically expedient. And if that means a Sunday law, they're not going to stand in the way of that. Donald Trump, he has said that he's going to give power back to the churches if he gets elected. And then Hillary, I guess my take on her would be that she's going to advance the liberal left agenda even more so than it already has been pushed.
Which will exacerbate
which will cause a swing back to the other way.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's kind of how I see the election heading. But I mean, for me in my lifetime, I've never seen such awful options. And for 300 plus million Americans, for us to have these two as our choices, it's pretty amazing.
It is amazing.
So
one of the things I've been watching over the years, over the last few years especially, has been the undermining of the rule of law and the rise of the mob in terms of the way governments act. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I haven't maybe spent as much time studying that. At least at a casual glance, certainly there's been more civil unrest, with police and African American population and the distrust that is growing between certain population groups and law enforcement. And
that's a fertile ground for politicians to play both sides of that.
Yeah, and that's also a sign of just the deterioration of the society that we're living in as we're getting closer to the end of the world.
Okay, so the politics that go on in the world always have some prophetic significance.
Yeah.
But there's other things that are happening in the world that are especially related to prophecy. What areas do you especially notice in the future, especially?
As Seventh-day Adventists, we have to be very interested as well as what's happening in the church. And
that was my next question.
Yeah. I mean,
that's all right. Go ahead.
To me, you look at what's happening in the world, which we've talked about, the politics of the United States and the unrest and the divide within the United States and even throughout the world. You look at what's happening in the Seventh-day Adventist Church as well, which, I'm thankful to be part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I'm a loyal member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and always have been. And I'm thankful for how God has raised up this church. But certainly we understand from the spirit of prophecy especially that a storm is going to come to Adventism, that there's going to be an iceberg that the church is going to meet. And if you just study the Bible, you understand that there's going to be a shaking. You study the spirit of prophecy, you understand that there's going to be a shaking. And some of the things that have been happening even within the last few years and even months is evidence that the church is ripe for the shaking. Now, if the shaking happens in the church, that would correlate with God's people being purified to go forward to give the last message as the world falls apart just before Jesus comes back. So for me, as a Seventh-day Adventist, I look at what's happening in the church, and you have essentially two versions of Adventism under one administrative structure. that can't go on forever. And you look at the world, it can't go on the way it's going.
It's already very divided.
Yeah.
It's actually two churches under one in a way.
Right. So that
means that eventually there's going to be more pressure to split that apart.
Yeah. So, and we don't know exactly how that's all going to play out, but other than that, we know that the church will go through. So that just tells me that the fact that we're getting to this point where the church has become so polarized, there has to be something significantly prophetic about that as well.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you see the church structure going through?
I do.
Even through the no buy, no sell?
You know, at that point, once you get to the Sunday law, things may be a little bit less clear, but I do think that the structure will remain faithful all the way to the testing time for Adventists, where everybody.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's
I think there's a lot of people that have a very hard time seeing that at the moment, at least.
Yeah, but I'm thankful for the leadership we have at the General Conference and how they're standing the way they are. So, and certainly I understand that not everything's perfect, but that just shows me that God is still leading the organized denomination. So that's how I see things.
Okay, so what do you see are the next big issues that will unfold in terms of prophecy itself?
It's hard to say for sure.
You said Daniel 11, for instance, is an interest in yours.
Yeah, so I do enjoy the study of Daniel 11. The way, and I'm pretty certain that we probably have a similar understanding of Daniel 11, but if you look at Daniel 11, the next major thing that I see happening, there may be a little bit left to unfold at the end of verse 40, where the king of the north makes his comeback as the deadly wound is healed. But then you have entering into the glorious land, which I believe is entering into the territory of God's church. When you study Daniel 11, whenever a king, the king of the north or the king of the south, enters into a territory, it's for the purpose of conquest. So if the king of the north, which is the papacy, enters into the territory of God's people, it's for the purpose of conquest. And according to that prophecy, the way God's people would be conquered would be through the Sunday law and the mark of the beast. So,
do you think the Jesuits have anything to do with that?
Well, the Sunday law crisis is going to be a commonly known or publicly known thing. Now, Ellen White does say that movements are at place, forces are, the agencies of evil are consolidating, those kinds of things. So there may be things happening behind the scenes. I don't comment about things that may be speculative, I can't prove. I don't comment on those things, but what I can say is that it's very clear how a Sunday law will come together, ultimately. Now, there may be undergirdings that help to set the table for that I don't necessarily comment on, but according to the prophecy of Daniel 11, entering into the glorious land would be passing a Sunday law that would then require God's people to come under the authority of the law of a union of church and state, papacy, Protestant America. And at that point, people have an opportunity to say, whose side am I on? And of course, the prophecy shows that there will be a faithful remnant in the glorious holy mountain.
How do you see the undermining of religious liberty going on in America right now?
Yeah, this is interesting to me because I had always felt, and maybe I was blind in this respect, I had always felt that the Christian Coalition religious right was scary because they were pushing to get God back into the country and they were going to bring church and state together, and I think that still will happen. I thought that the liberal left was truly liberal, where they were fighting for the rights of everybody. And of course, I don't agree with hardly anything that they're fighting for, but I thought that they would say, if you're a Seventh-day Adventist, we're going to protect your religious liberty so that you can worship God the way that you want. That's clearly not true now. Their goal is to take away any religious or civil liberties that will keep them from advancing the agenda that they want. But it's the same spirit. You have, if you look at prophecy, it's the dragon who gives his power, seat, and authority to the beast, and then the second beast worships the first beast. Well, that's Satan in control of that, but then you have the beast that comes up from the bottomless pit, or the abyss in Revelation 11, which is the beast of atheism, which Satan also raises up. So Satan works through both sides. So he works through the liberal left, he can work through well-meaning Christians who think they're following God, but they're going against the law of God. And so eventually the religious right's going to say we need a Sunday law to get back to God, which will play right into Satan's hands by going against the law of God. But the liberal left is using the same mechanism of intolerance towards people like us who say, you know, we respect everybody and everybody is a child of God, but this is what I believe and this is how I'm going to practice my life. I can't accept certain lifestyle choices and say that lifestyle practice can be considered okay in the church that I worship in, for example. If they start to say, no, you have to accept it in your church, then that's not America.
That takes away your religious freedom.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, where that's being undermined under the current administration.
Right.
And will probably be undermined in one way or another in the new administration.
Right.
Religious liberty is really the center freedom, the central freedom, the most important freedom of all. But there are other freedoms that surround it and protect it as a way, in a way. And I think it's something we have to think about in terms of what's coming down the line. First, we have the undermining of the other protective freedoms that we have in the Constitution. And then once they have been sufficiently eroded, then we have an assault on religious freedom. I used to think that religious freedom would be destroyed when the Sunday law comes.
Yeah.
But now it's coming first by other means, you know, through the healthcare law, through the same-sex marriage laws, the things that the liberal left, as you say, are pushing in order to get their way. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I think what the liberal left is doing, they think they have a majority, although, you know, they got a 5-4 vote on the Supreme Court. Something's going to happen. There's going to be some kind of a crisis that will trigger a reaction from the religious right, and even people who've been kind of in the middle who say we've gone too far. But then they're going to use the same principles of intolerance to push through getting the country back to God that will trample on our religious liberty as Seventh-day Adventists.
So the right is going to become as intolerant as the left.
Yes.
And the left likes to present itself as being very tolerant.
Yeah.
And they promote equal rights for everybody and toleration for everybody, except those who oppose their agenda.
That's right.
So they're really intolerant as well.
That's right.
But of course they paint the right as being very intolerant, and the right sometimes comes across that way.
Certainly,
I mean,
certainly.
In the campaign, Donald Trump came across that way.
Right.
So
right. I mean, as an American citizen, and I mean, I'm not going to get into politics. Ellen White makes it very clear to bury political questions as far as, you know, saying who you should vote for. I'm not here to say that.
In fact, the Spirit of Prophecy says we shouldn't, and I might as well say this so that our listening audience can grasp this. She says that if we vote for people or parties,
we're responsible for the sins.
We are participants in the sins they commit while they're in office.
Yeah, so I'm not here promoting any candidate per se, but you know, the thing I'm just concerned about is whatever happens, we're going to see political parties pushing things further. And I'll just say this, I think most likely, and I'm not saying this because I like this, but most likely Hillary Clinton will be elected. Most likely. I could be wrong. Maybe Trump will be elected. But if Hillary is elected, she's going to push things further along to the left. That will then cause the other side to have a candidate, potentially in even 4 years, maybe 8 years, but probably 4 years, that will come in and push things the other way. Who knows? Who knows?
It's hard to say.
But I'm not here to predict the future.
And the angels have all kind of tools in their toolbox to hold back the winds of strife, and pull this and push that, and things. The big structure that Satan is developing comes collapsing down, so you know, have to start all over again.
That's right.
It's amazing how much time and effort and money goes into restricting the rights of especially God's people in the last days.
Right.
So, I don't know, as I see it, we have to pray that God will put the person in charge who will do the less damage to his cause,
Right.
the least amount of resistance to the message that God has for us to give to the world.
Right.
And let's come back to that. What message, in the context of the times in which we live, what message should we be proclaiming at this point?
Well, it's the message of Christ our righteousness, because
But what does that include?
that includes, the health message, the three angels' messages, of course.
So come out of her, my people.
That's right.
So you be not partakers of her sins, and you be
Sure.
not recipients
So you
of her
have
plagues.
the everlasting gospel, the judgment hour message, the Sabbath message, worshiping God as the Creator, fearing God, giving glory to Him, the first angel, coming out of Babylon in the second angel's message. Yes, there's the mark of the beast in the third angel's message, but there's also the patience of the saints, the commandments of God, and the faith of Jesus in the third angel's message.
Yeah, that's right.
And when the world is becoming more and more like the dragon, now is the time for God's people to shine with Christ and His righteousness in our lives, because then the world will see the contrast, that we have the righteousness of Christ in our lives, and they're broken down with a Babylonian drought, basically, if you want to call it that leads to unhappiness, dissatisfaction. And we have the answer, we have the remedy as Seventh-day Adventists that God has given to us. That's the message that we need. And whenever I share on prophecy, I always try to make it practical. And, where's your heart? How do you stand with God? What's your walk with God like? Have you surrendered to Him? Is Christ being seen in your life on a day-to-day basis, so that people can see that you really have been with Jesus? What's your character like in a crisis? Those are the things that are preparations for the crisis that's coming to the world.
I see also that there's going to be a lot of people out there that when things really get bad, I mean, they're already getting toward that way, but there's going to be a lot more difficulties and crises and disasters and other issues that will come upon the world, and this will create a hunger for a knowledge of the Word of God.
Right.
And when there's a famine in the land, people are hungry for food. It's the same with the spiritual famine that's out there in the world today. And it's only being met superficially by most of the churches. But there's one system of Bible understanding, a mature, well thought out and deeply clear message that really is the answer for all of this.
Absolutely.
And people will come hungering for it. Are our people ready for that? Are they ready to help these people find their way?
And I give a sermon on this, but there's the parable of the 10 virgins. Some people are ready. Some are not. And we won't know until the crisis hits. So there's more people who are not ready than should be. More people should be ready than are. But thankfully there are people who are ready, and there are people who will be ready when that time comes. But yeah, there's too many Adventists, way too many Adventists that are Laodicean and who are not really connected to the reality of how soon Jesus is coming. Yeah.
And I think that's why Ellen White tells us to focus on current events in connection with the Bible, so that we can see that Jesus is coming soon.
Right.
And she actually says that in Signs of the Times.
Yeah.
But so we're living in a time when people are going to be really looking for the truth. They want to know what's, because they're fed up with the lies that they get from the politicians.
Yeah.
They're fed up with the way the elites manage the government and the world, for that matter. So they're going to be looking for answers, and God's church has those answers.
Right.
And we get to be part of that if we're faithful to the Lord and helping them find their way.
Sure.
So what message would you give to people that want to do more for the Lord, but don't know how. What would you offer them?
Well, the first thing I would say is make sure that your life is right with God, and that if Jesus were to come now, that you know that you're ready. So make sure that your life is in order. And then secondly, follow the Bible and the Spirit of Prophecy Council about the work you should be doing as a Seventh-day Adventist before Jesus comes back. Now, not everybody can do exactly the same thing. I mean, the Bible makes it clear in the Spirit of Prophecy that everybody has different gifts. But all of those gifts should be working in harmony for the promotion and the advancement of the three angels' messages. Mm-hmm. So someone may be a skilled carpenter, someone may be a skilled health worker, whatever it may be, but all of those things can be brought together in harmony to advance God's cause. And whatever line of work you're in, it should be with the primary motivation that you're advancing the cause of God and the
In other words, make it a soul-winning opportunity.
That's right.
No matter whether you're a doctor or a carpenter or an auto mechanic or whatever, you use the connections that you have in your field of experience and skill to offer people the way of salvation.
That's right.
That's seems to me that is, and the Bible gives us a huge amount of guidance. The Spirit of Prophecy gives a huge amount of guidance.
Right.
For God's people in these last days.
Absolutely.
And without the Spirit of Prophecy, I think we'd be much like other churches and organizations out there that just sort of have no rudder.
Right.
And so they look for a leader. And guess who they're finding? Pope Francis.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he plays into this in the background.
Sure.
Because he's a strong leader. And the Catholic Church is in a strong leadership position.
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that the Catholic Church is a very strong system, and people like that. So
they gravitate to anything that's strong.
Sure.
And so God's message, though, is stronger.
That's right.
The point is, the three angels' messages is the answer to all that. It's actually stronger than the powers of this earth. It puts that strength in the soul of the individual so that they become powerful in Christ under the guidance of the Holy Spirit.
That's right. You know, one thing that's interesting about the three angels' messages, there's a lot of powerful things in it, of course. But when you look at the loud cry of Revelation 18, when the three angels' messages, will lighten the earth, there's two elements that are very interesting. One is that God's character will illuminate the earth. But the interesting thing is that when God's character is illuminating the earth, there's also a message of warning with that, which says Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils. So you have Christ's character fully formed through the lives of God's people, and it's illuminating the earth so that people can say, you're like Jesus, I want to hear what you have to say. What do we say? That system that you are part of is of the devil.
That's going to hit some people pretty hard, I think, because many people are very wedded to that system.
Yeah. Now, it will obviously be given in a Christ-like way, but it's going to be given with a strong voice. And Ellen White makes it very clear that time comes when her sins reach to heaven, which is when the Sunday law is passed. So, there's a right way and a wrong way to give that message, but certainly we need to be willing to share it now. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining me in the studio today. It's been a pleasure to talk for a few minutes.
It's been very nice.
And I wish you God's blessing in your ministry and your work for the Lord.
Thank you so much.
And until we meet again, God bless you too, and keep the faith.